Hi everyone, welcome back to the series of IGCSE economics where we now move on to discuss the concept of production possibility curves. Now, before moving on to production possibility curves, you should be familiar with the concept of scarcity, factors of production, and opportunity cost. If you don't have any idea what they basically mean, you can go back and watch the videos that I have uploaded. So moving on to the production possibility curve, remember this thing that in many economic texts we use the term production possibility curve, but it's also called a production possibility frontier or a production possibility boundary as well. But in CAIE's economics, we will usually use the term production possibility curve. So it's basically the graphical representation that shows the maximum possible output combinations that an economy can produce of two goods and services, and it basically assumes that when we are producing these goods, the resources that we have are limited, they are fixed, and the technology that we are currently using is constant at the moment. And it basically shows how much the economy can produce when it utilizes all of its resources, when it utilizes all of its factors of production, how much output the economy can produce of two goods and services. Now, there are some certain assumptions that we make when we draw the PPC, and that are essentially stated in the definition as well. That the first assumption is that there are only two goods or services that we are producing. This basically means that since this diagram is a two-dimensional diagram, we cannot add more dimensions to it right now. So we assume, in order to make it simpler, in order to make it simple to understand, that there are only two goods and services that an economy can produce. The second assumption that we make when we are making a PPC is that our resources are fully employed. So there is full employment in the economy. Now, what does the full employment mean? Full employment means basically that all of your factors of production are utilized. There is no labor that is unemployed at the moment. There is no land that is left out. There is no capital that is left spare. All of the resources are currently utilized, and there are for employment. And the third assumption that we make when we draw a PPC is that we are utilizing the most efficient methods, the most efficient methods. So we are drawing the PPC under an assumption that the resources are being utilized efficiently, there is no wastages of resources that are happening, and there is no spare resources that are present in the economy. And the fourth assumption that we make when we draw the PPC is that the technology right now is constant, that the technology is not changing, because if the technology is changing, then the PPC would shift either outside or inside depending on the type of change. So in order to make it simple, for our own sake, economists usually make certain assumptions, and this is one of them. They hold some factors constant. So moving on, let's analyze what the diagram represents and what this basically shows. As we discussed, that this is a diagram that shows all maximum combinations, right? So on the curve, these are the combinations that an economy can produce. Let's call them A, B, C, D, and E and F. So all these A to F are combinations that an economy can produce of two goods, which are manufacturing goods and agricultural goods, which the economy can produce. Now you should know that an economy will always face trade-offs, the opportunity cost that we discussed. For example, let's suppose that the economy was producing output at point B, where they were producing 12,000 manufacturing goods and 3,000 agricultural goods. Now, let's say that the economy decides that they want to produce more agricultural goods. But to produce more agricultural goods, they would have to move to point number C. And at point number C, we can see that the economy can only produce 9,000 manufacturing goods and 6,000 agricultural goods. Now, even though the output of agricultural goods have increased, but in order to increase that agricultural output, we have to give up some certain units of manufacturing goods, right? So in order to get something, we have to forgo something. So that is how the PPC shows the concept of opportunity cost. In addition to that, the existence of this curve itself shows scarcity, because if there was no scarcity, then this curve would not exist, because we could have produced any amount of the good that we wanted, but we are limited by our resources, and we are limited because we cannot produce it at any point outside the PPC, and therefore this points those are outside the PPC are unattainable. For example, let's suppose that we have this combination where we want to produce 6,000 manufacturing goods and 12,000 agricultural goods. But this point, since it's outside the PPC, it is unattainable at the moment. So that is how the PPC represents the concept of opportunity cost, the concept of choice, and the concept of scarcity. Moving on, the second thing that is in our course and we need to understand is what different points on, under, on, and outside the PPC essentially mean. So let me just draw a PPC over here and let's discuss what these points essentially mean. So for example, if I have a basic production possibility curve over here, and I have good X over here, and I have good Y over here, right? And let's suppose that I am currently under the PPC. I am producing at this point where I am currently producing 1000 of good Y and 1500 of good X. Now remember this thing, whenever we have a point which is under the PPC, it's a point where the economy is not utilizing all of its resources. That means that we are producing below our productive capacity. Below our productive capacity. Because this basically means that we can produce combinations that are outside the PPC. We can produce beyond this point. But if the economy is currently operating inside their PPC, meaning that they're producing goods that are below their productive capacity, that means that the economy is not utilizing all of its resources. It means that there is a spare land available in the economy, the labor is unemployed in the economy, and capital, which is the machinery and your equipment, that is left idle, and that basically reduces your efficiency. So any point that is inside the PPC is inefficient, right? Because you're not utilizing all of your resources, it's productively inefficient. And another implication that you guys should know is that if we move from a point inside to outside the PPC, we won't incur any opportunity cost, right? At this point, there is the opportunity cost does not exist, because if I want to, let's suppose that I want to increase the production of good Y, I can simply produce at this point, and I can increase the production of good Y to, let's suppose, 2000 units, and I would not have to give up any of good X, because since I have resources available, I can just utilize those resources to produce good Y. I don't have to divert resources from good X to good Y in order to produce that more. So any point that is under the PPC, number one, is inefficient. Number two, it represents unemployment in the economy. And number three, it represents that you're producing below your productive potential, meaning that you can produce more, but you're not producing more at the moment. Furthermore, if we talk about, let's suppose we have a point that is on the PPC. So, and I have good Y and I have good X on the axis. And suppose that I have 2 points that are A, where I am producing 2000 of good Y and 1000 of good X, and I have another point at B where I am producing 1700 of good X and 1000 of good Y. So any point that is on the PPC, as we talked about earlier as well, represents full employment. Right? This full employment basically means that we are currently utilizing all of our resources, and there is no unemployment in the economy. All resources, all factors of production in the economy are fully employed, and there are no idle resources available. So in order to produce more goods and services, what we need to do is we need to divert our resources from one use to another, right? We need to reallocate resources from one use to another. For example, if I'm currently producing at point A and I want to increase the production of good X, I would need to move along the PPC. That would basically mean that I would need to reallocate resources from good Y, because the labor that is employed and producing good Y would need to be reallocated to the production of good B. And as a result, in order to produce more B, I would have to give up some certain quantity of good X to good Y to increase the quantity of good X. So as a result, whenever we are on the PPC, there will be an opportunity cost if we want to increase the production of one good. Finally, if we talk about a point which is outside the PPC, let's suppose we have a production possibility curve and we have good X and we have good Y. And we have a basic downward sloping production possibility curve, and then there is a point outside the PPC. This point which is outside the PPC, this basically represents that this is unattainable at the moment, because it means that we do not have sufficient resources to attain this point. We don't have sufficient technology available. We don't have sufficient factors of production to produce these quantities of good Y and good X simultaneously. So currently in the present, this point is unattainable at the moment. However, you guys should remember that the economy aims to achieve it, right? So this is our aim, that we want to increase the production. So with long run economic growth, with an increase in productive capacity, with an increase in quality and quantity of factors of production, our PPC can shift outwards, and this can be attainable in the long run. But in the current state of technology, it is unattainable. For instance, if there are technological advancements and improvements in our workforce, we can potentially shift the PPC outside, right? And if the PPC shifts outside, then this point can become attainable. But remember this thing, that with the current state of technology, with our existing resources, this point is unattainable. I hope that now the basics of production possibility curve and points inside, on and outside the PPC are clear. See you inshallah in the next video.